give to not only the spouses or significant others of law enforcement, but even their friends. When their spouse comes home, takes the badge off, the Velcro rips off, their phones, and that something's weighing them down. Sometimes they want to talk about what happened, other times they don't. Any advice on how to handle kind of the stress? We know that suicide's happening a lot more frequently. How can we support our friends and our spouses?
Great question.
I feel like the stem of a lot of that is you start to feel alone. As the spouse, you start to feel alone, and I think as the first responder, you start to feel alone. So we had a little bit of this dynamic happening because for about almost 10 years, I was a flight attendant, and he was a cop. So we learned pretty quickly that sharing our day was not productive for us. But that being said, making your home a safe space to share, I think a lot of times your first responder, being in that profession comes from having a servant's heart and from being a person who wants to serve their community. And then on the flip side, you're exposed to the worst of everybody all day long. And when you come home, there's a part of you that just wants to shut that off. And I think over time, you start to feel like the people at home don't understand anymore because you don't want to share that you found, babies in a trunk or whatever. That's not where you want to go with it. But I think as a spouse role to that, making it a place when the time is right, maybe not necessarily in the first hour when you get home. It could be a week later, it could be a couple days later, whatever, to be able to share that and get an appropriate response from the spouses. Because I think even as the spouse, you're not really used to hearing that kind of stuff and being able to be that sounding board. Like I just remember the other night, he was out doing a ride along with somebody, and it was a really tough night. There was a 17-year-old kid who ended up being the son of a person he went to high school with, was killed in a motorcycle accident just, half a mile down the road from us. And knowing that he could come home and say, man, you would not believe what happened. It was so difficult. And I think you have to have some of that conversations, because if the spouse isn't making you feel like you can share, like you can't overreact. You almost have to as a spouse, get a thick skin. Like you can't start crying or be upset or start saying, I'm so worried about your safety, you're not gonna be safe. That sort of thing. You have to be stronger than that and be like, hey, that sucks, I'm so sorry, That's my advice is as the person at home.
And I think first, what I tell all new people coming in this profession is you need an anchor. What is your anchor? If you don't have an anchor, you'll drift out to sea. And that anchor for me is my religion. So that's first and foremost. They did a study amongst millionaires, and all the millionaires had something in common. They were not nostalgic. And I also try to tell law enforcement guys this. It doesn't matter what happened. You can't change it. It doesn't matter. Don't even think about too much in the future, because you're not guaranteed that. You live now. So when you come home from those days, that's done. You still have time with your family to enjoy that time when you come home. Granted, you may need a little decompression, 5-10 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. Go sit, decompress. But in the end, you guys are all Vikings, so you probably all watched the show. Not Vikings fans. Yeah, I mean Vikings by blood. Oh, there we go. We got a Vikings fan here. What are they? Skull? What do they say? Do you watch the show Vikings? In there, there's a part where they're leaving the shore, and he's got his two little boys in the boat. And his boys are looking back at the shore. And he says, what are you doing? Why are you looking back? We're not going that direction. And that's really it. I'm not going that direction anymore. That's done. The other thing I would say is learn empathy. Because if you don't learn empathy, you will become jaded, you'll become angry, you'll be that cop that that a lot of cops turn into. There's a difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is not good. Sympathy is getting involved in the emotions of what somebody's going through on the call. Somebody who dies, you're sympathetic to that, you're gonna carry that with you. I'm empathetic. I go to the house, I understand, I want to understand what precipitated, why am I here for this domestic violence? You know what? I understand you'd be upset over that. But when I leave that call, I don't take it with me. And the last thing I would say is what I talked about earlier, surrender the outcome. I tell young cops, pump the brakes a little bit. Drive safe, make sure you get to the call. If you get there in time to save their life, then it's meant to be. If you don't, then it's not.